One.
Well, good morning, guys. It's good to see all of you on this wonderful Thursday morning. Snowing pretty good up north here. But it's Thursday, the 25th of February, and we've got Jim with us and Catherine from Joint Fiscal, and Faye's with us again, and who else? We got Brenna, is it?
It's
Brianna.
Brianna. Thank you.
Brianna from Joint Fiscal.
That's right.
And Brianna, I don't know if you know everybody on the committee. We can run through and introduce ourselves. I'm Bobby Starr and I chair the committee. Chris?
Chris Pearson from Chittenden County, Vice Chair. Hi.
Hello.
Hi, Anthony Polina, Washington County.
Nice to meet
Brian
you.
Collmore representing Rutland County.
And I'm Corey Parent. I represent Franklin County.
So welcome everybody, and we'll get started with Jim. Jim, we had a few little changes yesterday? Did you get the new language from the agency?
Yeah, so I did get a few bullet points to put into statutory language. I sent them that language overnight, but I haven't heard back from them yet as to whether it's what they want. But I just did my best to frame it. So it's in the bill now.
Yeah, and you wanna run through those quickly?
Sure. Yeah. Can I share the screen, Linda?
We have Gail with us this morning.
Oh, Gail. Sorry, Gail.
Linda's gone ice fishing.
Oh, good for her. Sounds
No,
terrible.
I'm just-
Here it is. Yeah. Okay. Okay, let me just minimize this and make this a bit bigger.
Your daughter get away okay, Jim?
Yep, she is in England,
Oh,
so she's back home.
Cool.
Okay, so for the record, Jim Demery, Let's Council, we're going through draft 9.1 of your bill on school food programs. Only really one change here, which has to do with the household income form and making that a more generic provision. And what I've done is find it. Yeah, it's all the same here. I've added a new section of law. It's here. Okay. So in Title 16, there is a subchapter on federal funds, making the agency the one to receive and distribute them, etc. So I've added a new section to that subchapter concerning data collection. So it reads that the Secretary of Education shall define the term student poverty for the purpose of determining qualification for federal funds by school districts. And now this is not just for school food programs, this is for everything. So this is why I put it here rather than in the school food program section, because qualification based on student poverty could be used for various federal funds. Yep.
Special ed and a host of other programs, right?
Right, yep. So, so Secretary will define what it means for purposes of qualification, establish what data should be collected by school districts to qualify for federal funds based on student poverty, the means by which the data should be collected and the frequency of collection, and determine how this data shall be reported to the Agency of Education by school districts in the frequency of reporting. And then B, school districts shall collect data as necessary to qualify for federal funds based on student poverty and report this data to the Agency of Education in accordance with subsection A that we just went through.
So,
So,
go ahead.
so that was my interpretation of what the AOE sent over. They sent over a few bullet points. I put them into this language, but I haven't heard from them yet whether they agree with this or not.
Well, I'm sure they'll have questions. So basically, it puts the onus on the supervisory union of the school districts. And right now, they must be collecting this data to qualify for special ed and a host of all these other programs that the feds put forth. And I don't know, committee, you've heard it, how does this not comply with the federal rules? And wouldn't it be in a school district's best interest to have a standardized form to collect this data on to keep their taxes lower and to provide the things to our students that they actually need? Chris?
Jim, there's a term, student poverty, and is that defined somewhere, or is that defined in federal law?
That is the term that the AOE sent me last night. So that's the term I've used based on their request.
But we don't define it here, do we?
We don't define it here. Nope.
Okay. And then the other question is, this is a mandated collection, and is that different? Because it says secretary shall here, and then lower down, I can't see it right now, the districts shall. Yeah, keep going.
Yeah, I think what's happening now is that now that they're collecting information specifically for qualification for the free and reduced price lunches. Right? But I think the concern is that will go away because it'll be a universal program, but they're going to need to collect that data somehow in order to ensure that students qualify for various programs. So I think the shall is correct, but that's another question for the agency.
I just want to be clear, that is a new requirement in that sense.
I'm not sure. I'm not sure if it's new or if it is new in statute. It's new in statute for me, at least. I haven't seen that before, but there might be requirements already in law, maybe in federal law. I'm not sure.
Thanks.
So, yeah. So this puts the burden on the school district, not on AOE to collect it.
Right.
And I think, that wouldn't be our jurisdiction anyways. But I think Brian and the crew in education, they're going to get swamped with questions on this. But I think for us to forward this on, it sounds like, how do you qualify for special ed? And that's millions of dollars. It's a heck of a lot more, I believe, than hot lunch subsidies.
Right.
And
Special education, though, is not done based on poverty. Special education is done based upon students who have been identified as needing special education services through their IEP.
so
whatever is
there's
required in their
different qualifiers.
correct.
then.
Yep. Correct. Yep.
Is there any way do you think there's any way to set those qualifiers up very similar? Or
It's a whole different system, actually. I think.
it
Yeah.
Yeah. Because it's too bad to have to jump through two hoops if you could get it organized and written up where there was, very similar qualifiers for both programs.
Yeah, the problem I think is that the free and reduced lunch is based upon student poverty, and special education is based upon needs identified through the individualized education program for a student.
So we may run into a snag there, Anthony.
Yeah, I just don't totally understand. The federal government has already defined poverty, I presume, for the purposes of determining federal funds. Are we saying that we may have a different definition of poverty than the federal government would, and aren't they not going to like that?
Something I can't answer that. Again, this came over from the agency. I think they need to testify on what they sent over.
Okay.
This is framed the way they sent that over.
Okay.
Did you understand that? And I didn't get a clear response on my computer, Jim. Would you repeat that, please?
I was just saying that I'm not sure what the answer to Senator Polina's question is, about whether there's a federal definition of student poverty and whether this is consistent with that. It's really, I think this was sent over again by the agency last night, so I think you should hear from them as to that question.
Yeah.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
you raise a good point, I think, and I had the same sort of question. Everything here from line 17 says Secretary of Education shall, and then there's 2 or 3 different things. But then at the end, it says the school district shall. And I'm wondering what sort of burden is placed on the school district by that provision. In other words, what are they collecting now? Are they going to have to do additional work? Who's going to do it? And is that going to be a matter of concern for the individual school districts?
Jim, have you chased that down at all?
No, I mean, this has been moving fast for me. So it's really a question, I think, for AOE to answer.
Yeah.
Or maybe some of the advocates.
Okay, thank you.
Chair Starr, I don't want to interrupt, but I could address some of this if you would like, Mrs. Fay.
Yeah, that would be fine, Faye.
Sure. So for the record, Faye Mack from Hunger Free Vermont. The way that, as Jim is noting, the agency will be able to testify a little bit more clearly on this, but the way that I am understanding this, so the language prior to this had the word shall, and it was that the Agency of Education shall develop a household income form and that schools shall implement the household income form. And so the difference in what is being presented today is that it gives the agency flexibility to determine, is it the household income form or is it something else to collect the data in the absence of a school meal application. So it's giving them the flexibility to identify the best practice. But the process is still the same. To the questions about sort of what is being collected. So right now, for schools that do not provide universal school meals, the school meal application serves as the way that the school collects poverty data for some federal funding, not all federal funding, like special education, but for other federal funding. This would just replace the school meal application with another way to collect that same data from families when the school meal application goes away. And right now, in the schools that are already providing universal school meals, they're doing so through what we call a household income form, but it could be done through a different kind of form. So this language just allows the agency to determine what the method is and to ask schools to do that. So it doesn't actually shift it just creates some more flexibility in identifying what the process will be, what the actual data collection method will be, but the process of the agency establishing what that process is and directing schools to do that is what's current practice as well, which is my understanding. So this, from my perspective, this is, I like this change. You know, I think we would support this change. It just gives AOE more flexibility.
Just a second, Faye, we're getting a lot of feedback from.
Sorry, I have the F-35s taking off over me. I'll mute.
That's all that is an F-35 taking off?
They're coming over me now.
It is. I live under the flight path in Winooski, so apologies.
You'd think they'd put some mufflers on those things. Go ahead, Faye. Thanks. Sorry to bother you.
Oh, no, that's okay. That's all. I don't know if there are other specific questions that I can help with. I will note that what has been eliminated by this language is the process of the Agency of Education working with stakeholders out in the community, either the school business office association, or others in developing the best practice, which we would support having in there. But as is meets that flexibility that the agency was asking for.
Yeah, the only thing is, I'd like to see this done before I pass on to the other world. And if we kind of mandated them to do it, hopefully they would call you folks in. But if you think that should be in there, I mean, I don't see a big problem with having it there, but we could put something in that would suggest that or recommend it.
From my perspective, I think it's important. I don't want to hold up the process at the moment, and that I think there'll be other opportunity to bring it back in. So would be happy with it as going forward as is.
Well, and you've got to have something to do when this bill gets to education. That would be a good recommend for Senator Campion, right?
Absolutely.
Committee, do you have questions in regards to Faye's suggestion or recommend?
Mr. Chair, I just still don't have a clear idea of what sort of work this puts on the school district in terms of what they're doing now and what they will do in the future if this bill passes. Is it more work or just different work?
Faye, could you answer that on the 70 or 80 schools that are already in?
Yeah, so Senator Collmore, I think it's different work broadly. They're already collecting this information through school meal applications, and they do work to encourage families to fill that form out and to get it back. This would just mean that they're collecting that information from families through a different form or a different method as determined by the agency. So it's just different work. It's not, this is information they're already gathering. But when that school meal application goes away, they need a different way to do it. So it's just different.
So you would not characterize it as additional work?
Broadly, no.
Okay,
I mean, I think Rosie was saying yesterday that each school puts different amounts of resources into how they collect this information. And there are groups like we help schools collect this information and give them materials and template letters they can use and support schools in getting this information from families. So all of that remains. I think it's up to each individual school how they do it.
Thank you.
Have you or any of your other organizations, do you know, received any negative feedback from the schools that are already doing universal meals in regards to getting these apps filled out?
No, That hasn't
Not
been,
the
we've
one?
I don't think the forms are the main source of concern for schools. What we hear is how happy they are to have made the switch to universal school meals and the impact that they're seeing.
So all positive. So other questions in regards to the language that Jim just presented? What?
Bobby, I'm okay with it. I mean, this still has a stop in education where I'm assuming this is where they're going to really dig into these issues and flush this out. So, I mean, if we're looking from a timing perspective, I don't need to have this 100% figured out to support the bill out, if, from my perspective.
Yeah, good. So if we're good with that language change that Jim presented, we'll go to Catherine and Brianna. And Catherine, I'm sorry I didn't get back to you because by the time I got to my emails last night, I figured probably you were asleep. And then I said, well, I'll call Catherine early in the morning. And the phone started ringing at 6:30 and well, here we are.
I completely understand. And so I think what I'd like to do is we do not have a full fiscal note developed yet, but we've been working on numbers. So, and we've been working with Faye and with the Agency of Education, and Brianna has been the lead on doing the data analysis. I also want to say that Mark Peralt worked on this in the past, and he's on leave, but he'll be back in the office on Monday. So he will also be reintegrated into this discussion. Tell me what information you're looking for and what you're thinking about and what it is you want.
Well, we're fishing. Yeah. What I think for us, I think a couple of the things that are really important is to know like how many free and reduced meals we provide in Vermont today, what the payment is for free meals from the feds as well as the reduced meals. It would be good to know what other commodities that maybe if there are any that the government supplies to the meals program. Because what we're getting is we're getting a $50-odd million cost from the ed department, and we're getting a $20-odd million cost from the advocates. And I fooled with the numbers to some degree, just at home here. And I can't imagine how you can possibly get to either of those numbers. So if you take 70,000 kids, because they aren't all going to eat, and pay them $5 a meal for them for 180 days, and you try to figure that all out, and the numbers don't add up. And then the other issue, and it's in the bill, is that this would be phased in over a 5-year period. So it would be an ongoing cost to the school districts, but we need to know a little bit from somebody about what that annual cost could be, a maximum and a median cost to the school districts.
Sure. So maybe I can speak to that a little bit. And Brianna, like I said, we have been going through various scenarios, and a lot of it has to, you have to figure out how many kids are going to take advantage of it is one piece. I think the other piece is you wonder how many kids will shift from the reduced lunch to the and will no longer want to fill out the paperwork. That's another piece of it that will, so they will end up in the paid situation. But let me just draw a distinction. And I think both numbers are relevant, but there's one number that is potentially the full cost of the program. And I know the agency had said 50 million. That's if all the kids do everything. That being said, some schools are already doing it. So it's already being paid for. So of the 50, if you took that $50 million, the outside number of total cost, there's actually a portion of it that's currently, I think is it 20%, if I got that right, 20% of the
about
kids.
20% of students are currently in universal school meal schools
So
already.
to give you an idea, so I think is it's just important to understand when people put numbers in front of you, which number they're talking about. And from my perspective, what I care about really is I care more about the new cost, the additional cost. The total cost is important, but I think what you're looking for is what's going to change. And so the change would not be the full cost. It would be where we are now to where we're going. And so depending on what you assume.
So we're already down to 40 million, right?
Well, we in our rough estimate, and we are gonna have a fiscal note, but I would say we're in the 23 to $39 million range of new costs. And and that all depends on the participation rate. I think that's a big driver. Brianna, I don't know if you want to pipe up and say anything about the scenarios. Why don't you go ahead?
Thank you. So yes, Catherine's absolutely right. The participation rate matters greatly because it really depends on, if more meals are being served, obviously the costs are going to be a lot higher. And so what we were trying to do is to kind of flesh out what some of those options might be. And so if we think about, if we want to have the full participation rate, we wanted to go with maybe how many students are going to be there, on a daily basis. And so at that high end, we're looking at, about that $40 million cost. However, if we say maybe we don't have that many students that want to eat every day and take participation in this meal, and we have 60% of students opting to eat breakfast and 75% opting to eat lunch, that would come in at closer to $23 million. And so I think that can give a little bit of a sense of the scale in which the participation rate really matters. And I think, realistically, not every student is going to eat every day. So I think somewhere in that range would be a likely cost. Yes, Senator Pearson.
Mr. Chair, can I ask a question?
Sure. Yeah.
Thanks. I get there's a ton of variables, hard to predict the future. But we also have a ton of data. We have 20% of our schools who've been doing this, some of them for 20 years. So what happens when we take their experience and extrapolate that to the whole state? What's that number?
Do you want to take it to your head?
I would say that, those participation rates, that is what we're looking at in terms of the meals. I don't have the exact number right now on what the cost is currently. So I could definitely try to work on that and circle back.
To me, that's the most, if somebody said you have to pick something, that's what I would pick. So understanding that number, because that deals with experience of participation rate, experience of data collection, after that we're guessing. So if it would help me, and I think it would help us talk to our colleagues if we could pin that number down. If there's a logic behind why you want to tweak that up or down as we consider expanding this, that'd be great. And I'd also like an understanding of how you phase this in. What is the logic behind, what logic are you picking to help us guess what's going to be year 1 versus year 5? Obviously, very big difference.
Okay, just to be clear, we were sort of going for the full. This is the full, and with everybody in. We hadn't dealt with the transition yet, because I think that is a fair question. But this was trying to figure out. So once it's fully implemented, where do you end up? That's a great question, but we haven't gotten there.
So, yeah, okay. So 23 million might be our biggest number. is what you're saying. I mean, it's the low end of the biggest number. Thank you.
And to be
So-
clear, once again, I just want to distinguish when you say the biggest number, this is the new cost, once again, because I think sometimes people talk about those two different numbers. This is not the total cost. It's the new cost that would come as a result of this.
Brian, you had a question?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. And I want to just follow up Senator Pearson's inquiry. And that's where I was trying to get to when I asked Faye and Jim the same question. So here's how I'm envisioning this. The current landscape costs this much money. It involves this many students, and it involves this much work for both AOE and the local school districts. When we change that, that's why I asked what sort of additional burden it would place on the local SDs, and then what changes in the AOE might that look like. And then obviously the money part is a key part of that as well. So I just, that's where I was coming from. I'm looking at the current situation, and as we slowly begin to ramp up, we ought to at least have some benchmarks that say, okay, now we're at 33%. The next step might be 50% and up and up and up. And here's what it would mean for all the people involved. And I think that's where we want to go, realizing full well that the next trip down the hall to Senate Education, they're going to take even more testimony and refine this to some extent as well. And obviously it's going to wind up in a money committee as its last stop before it hits the floor. So that's where I am.
Yeah, Faye?
I don't know if Catherine or Brianna have any answers to that. I can let them go first, but I could try to address that a little bit, Senator Collmore. So, yeah, so it's really great to hear about the work that Catherine and Brianna are doing, and I appreciate Senator Pearson your point about grounding it in what we already know from schools. And we'll just say that that's the calculations that Hunger Free Vermont has been putting together are based off of the current experience of all the schools that are providing universal school meals with a round up. So we are trying to, really be look at the higher end, because we know that once all schools move to universal school meals, the full culture around school meals will shift in the state, and we might see an increase in participation higher than what we've seen so far in some schools. I can also, I don't want to just throw a lot of numbers at you verbally because that's hard. But Senator Starr, I can also provide some answers to some of the questions you're asking about commodities and federal dollars. I do know that right now there's about $39 million in federal dollars coming in through the child nutrition programs. And we estimate that this would bring in about $9.8 million more each year.
More?
Yeah, that would be the increase, and that's due to the increased participation.
So we'd be up to almost $50 million coming in.
Yeah.
Yep.
To the current cost question, and Senator Collmore, to your question about sort of what shifts, what's the shifting burden on schools and school districts. The individual cost of the school meal programs that's falling into the education fund already is different for each school, because they all have different size school meal budgets and are able to run their programs differently. They have different efficiencies of scale and sort of boiled down cost per meal of what it actually costs to make the meals. So it's hard to get at what is currently being covered in the education fund, which is why we've all been talking about what the additional cost to the education fund would be. For schools making the transition, each year, each school that makes a transition to the universal school meals program, that will also have it'll have a different cost for each school. The difference between Essex Westford School District coming into universal school meals versus, a very small school district will be different. So you can't really take the 21 million or 23 million and divide it by the number of schools that are left. And then, and we don't know how many schools would choose to come on to universal school meals each year over the 5-year. The transition to taking on universal school meals, that is work. And that's why we have in the bill have recommended, and you all are recommending the additional position within the Agency of Education to help support schools doing that. Organizations like Vermont Feed and Hunger Free Vermont work really closely with schools as they're making that transition to help, should guide and support them in what they're doing. But it is work to make that transition. And there are some pieces of work that go away. When cafeterias are no longer having to chase down, the principals spend a lot of time calling families and trying to get unpaid meal debts paid. It's about $1 million a year in unpaid meal debts for families that schools are absorbing. So it's shifting work, it's a different program. I don't know if that helps get at your question a little bit more.
No, it does. And I realize there's obviously variations from very small schools to large. I just was trying to get an overall sense of, it sounds like it could work.
And that's why there's the 5-year transition too, because for some schools it will be more work and for some schools it won't. And so that way there's a few years for schools to really prepare if they do have kind of a bigger transition to make.
Maybe it would even give the principal more time to work with the preschool teachers so the kids could read when they get to the 3rd grade instead of collecting hot lunch bills that some clerk should be doing.
One of the things when we did sorry. I was just going to say that when we did a study on that, one of the things that principals reported was that they have much better relationships with the parents and the caregivers, that it changes the dynamic. Families aren't afraid of the phone call from principals and school administrators because they don't owe money to the school, that it allows them to actually focus on, their child's education together.
And I don't know if you collected this data, but the years, that I was on the school board, at least 2 different times, the agent would kind of lose some money and disappear. And so you'd avoid all of that whole fiasco. And we're the choir. So, Chris?
I'm wondering if you, Mr. Chair, or either of our guests from JFO could help me understand, but in the last few years, the state has, you would think, moved heaven and earth to get schools on a single budget structure, right? I forget what we called it, the unified something.
Yes.
I remember Senator Ash had a whole diatribe about how we won the Second World War in less time than it's caused. Then it's taken to shift schools to all report their budgets in a more standard way. But does that help? Does that play into our ability to know what is the current landscape for schools in terms of their meal costs? And is that, maybe do we get a little lucky with that timing in terms of helping us contemplate budgets around this project?
Theoretically, yes. I can't speak to the details that I haven't looked through the system. I will tell you that rollout is not going smoothly right now.
No.
I don't know if you've heard. And so Dan Smith in our office, who reviews IT projects, is actually working on that. And the agency is going to be presenting something tomorrow tomorrow's Friday, right? In House Education about this. So next week they'll be hearing about it. So in theory, yes, it should help. I don't know if it'll help enough to provide all the details that you're asking for, but it would help. But it's also we're not there yet, unfortunately.
Yeah,
but
they're fighting that. Everybody's fighting that tooth and nail.
I won't tell Tim Ash then.
I mean, it's unreal what we've heard in approach in regards to that. And there's 250 school districts or something. I mean, it could be all done in a year. And I mean, well, this is a problem, that's a problem. We've done this for 50 years, like the, instead of just telling them, okay, the money's gonna stop coming if you don't change it. I mean, golly. But thanks, Catherine. Catherine,
Yes.
you and Brianna have gotten off to a good start.
Yes, I think we have, and I think we should have a fiscal note, hopefully by the time you get back. It will probably be arranged because once again, I think we would say it's unclear about the participation rates, but I think once again, the distinction between total cost and the additional cost is important to keep in mind because people lose track of that pretty quickly. I do actually have a question about the local food thing, but I want to finish up with this first before we go on. So anyway, Mark will be back. We'll involve Mark as well in this discussion.
Yeah, but getting back to the numbers that you've sort of come up with roughly so far, if we had to gear it up full bore, the low end of the big numbers, 23 million. And now you haven't counted in any savings or any of that, I don't believe, from.
That's correct.
So we've got that, but even if it was 25 million, the top price, and we did it over 5 years, it would be somewhere, I don't know if this is accurate, but you divide that out, it's $5 million a year additional, but we're also going to pick up that $9 million more in reimbursements, right, Faye? We would pick up money from the reimbursements of 9 million. So you take a couple of million there a year, we could be down to $3 to $6 million a year.
I think our number is net of the federal reimbursement. We've already accounted for the fact that I think Faye's numbers we're assuming as more students enroll, you will pull down more federal dollars, and we have already accounted for that in our number.
You've added that in.
Yeah.
Yes.
They both exist together. The federal doesn't offset the state, the increased costs.
So right, this is, and you're right. I don't know how it would roll out. Eventually, you're going to get to the point where let's assume it's 25. And I'm going to pick that number for purposes of discussion, but it would be, yes, that's a full implementation. How it rolls out, I don't know if Faye would know better how the schools are really going to, what schools would move forward quickly and which ones wouldn't.
Yeah, that's why we need you folks to fool with this and to, put your best foot forward and come up with a definite, be better than a ballpark figure, be the best one in town as far as I'm concerned, because we're all over the place at the present time, and when you get down to appropriations and start, Jane likes to hear you folks in your numbers, and we go to the bank with those usually and come out okay.
Well, I mean, I can give you two perspectives on this also. Obviously, $25 million or whatever the number is a lot of money, right? It's just a lot of money. But on the other hand, the total ed fund, is 1.8 billion. Yeah. So it's you need to think about it in the context of that, but it's not insignificant, but there are trade-offs, and that's what you all get to talk about and decide about how to make those choices. And I'm sure it'll be an ongoing discussion of this as well. Yeah, but we will. When are you planning to vote this bill out? Do you know? Are you planning to do it this week or when you're back?
I think we could wait until. I'd like to give Brian, the Ed Committee have it down there so they could start working on it when we get back.
Yep.
And we don't need all the numbers, if knowing that they're going to work with the numbers and changing the wording to some degree. And the numbers won't really happen until we get to appropriations. But I'd like to give them at least a week to work on this, because when we come back, that Friday is crossover, and
Right.
I know Ed isn't going to like pushing this bill along, but I think we do, and I hope the majority of the Senate does, because it's past its time.
Mr. Chair,
Chris?
it also doesn't instantly go to Ed, so I'm almost wondering if we're ready to vote on it today so that Ed gets the full week, as opposed to, how it's a funny thing, even like they could look at the language, but if they don't get it till Wednesday when we're back, I don't know how much you've been able to coordinate with the chair. I alerted him this was coming, but I'm not sure he understood the workload.
Well, I told, again, yesterday we had a visit, and I told him that we were going to try to get it down there so he would have it for the full week to fool with. I hadn't talked with you guys yet about, pushing it down the hall, but I think our part of the bill is in pretty good shape. The local foods and incorporating that into the program and all of that. I think he's still got some lifting to do on this stuff that we're talking about today, and putting final touches on it. So, I'd like to get it. If we moved it today out of committee, maybe even by tomorrow, we could forward it to education, if that's agreeable. We'll discuss that after we get done, our discussion with Catherine and Brianna and Faye. I think Catherine and Brianna, we kind of loaded a lot onto you, but hopefully you'll have time and get Mark back, and he can kind of help you a little bit, and we can have some pretty good numbers for education if they want them, and for appropriations if we get that far. Well, I think we're going to get there. It's just gonna take some pulling and pushing. But Catherine, you brought up a good point about 25 million is a lot of money. But you take those 77,000 children or 75,000 children and divide that into the 1.8. Well, if we can spend $24,000 per pupil to get them into the schoolhouse and go through the system, we ought to be able to put a $5 meal on the table for them to eat. But that's just my rambling on personal thoughts. So anyways, any other questions for Faye, or did you feel comfortable going over to Ed and getting your crew loaded back into the bill?
We are excited to do so. Yes.
As we could do that, but that'll give them something positive to do. Any other questions from the committee, Chris?
I think Catherine had a question about the local food incentive. So let's make sure.
Yes, that's, so
Yeah,
I want to,
okay,
Yeah, and I appreciate that, and we will continue to work. We'll keep you informed when we do get the universal meal estimate fiscal note done. We will make sure that you all get it as well. And I expect it'll be a range because of participation rate estimation. But on the locally produced foods, I believe, and I don't know these programs very well, but it sounded, the way the appropriations were written, it sounded, I'm trying to get to that language right now. It sounded like yes, thank you, Jim. If you go to the
Section 8.
is Section 8, is that where it is?
so
Section 9, I think, actually, no, because he's added a
Is-
section.
Oh, there
It's-
we go. Yes.
It's not moving for me.
Oh, well, maybe I
So-
can just read it, Jim. It's okay. I could read it. And
Okay,
there's one, you talk about you're giving 500,000 to the Vermont Agency of Agriculture, Food and Markets for the annual base appropriation for the farm to school. So that is an ongoing that's a base appropriation that currently exists.
Yes,
So I understand you may want to put it in here, but you don't need it in here because if it's in the base budget, it's already going to be in the base budget. So it will get pulled out of this bill at some point. I mean, appropriations probably will go through this process, but I wanted to clarify. It sounded like that was a current program. You're not adding any additional money to that. Okay.
No.
And the local foods incentive grants is new though. Is that a new program? Okay. All right. That is helpful.
it varies, doesn't it, according to time, or isn't there a variation in there on the subsidy for that?
Well, there is in the first year implementation where you're giving them some extra money, or you're letting them, you give them 500,000 for FY22 for their grant. This is to the agency, and they may use up to 60,000 to retain a contractor. And then you tell them to request in their future budgets the 500,000. Is that so? Okay, that's all new. Okay, that was helpful.
And so do you feel that we should pull that 500 out? Because it's not necessary to be in there, right?
I think what we will do in our fiscal note is we will say that that's in the base budget. So that's not new. Once again, that may be in spending, but that's not new spending. So we would not identify that as new spending. We would say that's current spending. I don't think if you want to leave it in there for purposes of discussion to go through the committees, that's fine, but I don't think it should be there in the end. But if it's helpful for people to understand that it's out there, which I can appreciate that you would want people to understand that. So just know that it'll probably likely not be there in the end because it's in the base budget.
Right. Faye, did you have a comment?
I just wanted to note that the current base funding for farm to school is $171,000. So it is an increase in funding.
Oh, it is. Okay.
It is,
Thank
yes.
you.
So it's a recommendation for that 500,000 is full funding, would be full funding for the program. The funding shifts every year. But the governor's current proposed budget, it's $171,000.
Thank you, Faye, for that clarification.
Yes.
Okay, so we will.
The intent is to recommend an annual funding of $500,000 for it.
Yeah,
Okay.
Chris?
Hey, do we need 500,000 in the first year, or is that also track the the acceleration over the coming years?
So the 500,000 for farm to school and early childhood education programs is the full funding that the farm to school network has determined would help reach the farm to school network goals of sustainable, robust farm to school programs in 75% of Vermont schools and expanding in the early childhood education programs. Why part of the reason that it's in here is that one of the things that we've learned from New York State and Oregon, who have done the local purchasing incentive, is that strong technical assistance and support through farm to school programs has been really key to the success of the incentive program and schools actually being able to increase their purchasing. So they kind of go hand in hand. So it's not a ramp up over with universal school meals. It's more closely tied to the local purchasing incentive.
And
My understanding from Betsy is that the farm to school network is ready to, they're poised and ready to utilize full funding immediately if it were added. And so the 500 has been something that we've been advocating for a number of years.
Yeah, and I remember the woman that retired was helping me understand this, because after all, ideally you'd work with a school, the network works with a school and moves on. So it's not, it
Right.
doesn't amplify, it doesn't ramp up as the schools increase. It's sort of they
Right.
keep moving. All right.
Right.
Thanks.
It provides grants to schools to do for farm to school programming, which is helps make the connections with farmers and kids and the community, local food in the cafeteria, and also farm and food education in the classroom.
And I haven't talked with Carolyn about what they're going to recommend to their appropriations committee, but in past, I've talked with her about this, and I assumed that they were quite supportive of increasing this appropriation.
Yeah, they recommended $500,000 in their memo to the appropriations committee.
So they
are supportive of full funding. Yes.
So possibly that could come over, in their proposed budget from the House to the Senate. That increase could already be recommended from the House side. But anyways, thanks, Faye. Are there other questions for Catherine or Brianna or Faye, anything else? Well, thanks a lot, folks, for this morning and for your time. Certainly appreciate it. And thank you, Jim. And we'll give you next week off. So we'll hopefully we'll be working with Ed, and we can get you can get your numbers to them and to approach, and we'll move forward hopefully. So thanks again.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Yeah, thanks, Faye. Well, I don't know, guys. I think the numbers sound better than yesterday's numbers. I mean, God, we're offline, I think.
That's why I was putting my hand up. No, we're not.
We're on YouTube for sure.
I will, if
I
we're going to
thought it was-
take a break, I'll take us off the live stream.
Yeah, we're going to take a little break and then come back in 15 minutes or so.